scotch and soda, mud in your eye. Baby, do I feel high? Oh me, oh my. Do I feel high? Dry martini, jigger of gin. Oh, what a spell you've got me in. Oh my. Do I feel high? People won't believe me. They'll think that I'm just bragging, but I could feel the way I do and still be on the wagon. All I need is one of your sweet, sweet smiles, the sunshine of your eye on me. Oh my, do I feel higher than a kite can fly? Oh, give me lovin', baby, I feel high. People won't believe me. They'll think that I'm just bragging. Oh, but I could.
All right, good evening. Welcome to the City of Lakewood City Council study session for March 21st, 2016. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Paul?
Here.
Wickman? Here. Vincent?
Here.
Roybal?
Here.
Harrison?
Here.
Johnson?
Here.
Shakti? Abel?
Here.
Coop?
Here.
Franks? Gutwein. You have a quorum.
All right, thank you. Well, I appreciate the folks that came out tonight on this beautiful first day of spring evening. And for those of you that are tuning in on TV or going to watch us on the internet, tonight we have a couple of items. One is a presentation on the Neighborhood Participation Program, which is a lot of fun stuff and trying to find different areas to do great things in our neighborhoods. And then a kind of heavier deal on a new intergovernmental agreement with the town of Morrison relating to the Rooney Valley. So we have staff presentations, and we'll go ahead and start with item 3, the Neighborhood Participation Program. Good evening.
Well, thank you, Mayor and City Council. I'm Holly Bain with the Comprehensive Planning and Research Division. And tonight I wanted to give you a little bit of a background on our Neighborhood Participation Program, talk a little bit about our selection criteria and the process for selecting our applications, then update you on the status of some unfinished projects that are now finished, and then provide to you our list of recommendations for our 2016 program year. The Neighborhood Participation Program, or NPP, which I'll call it throughout the evening, began in 1992 with a resolution by City Council. Since the program has started, we have funded 124 projects throughout the city. We have in the budget $160,000 for construction and $20,000 for project contingencies and design work. There are just some very basic project requirements. The first is it has to have a general benefit to an entire neighborhood and not just a select few. It must not significantly increase city maintenance requirements. The funding level per project cannot exceed $60,000, and the project cannot be currently in the 5-year capital improvement and preservation program budget. The selection process is a competitive process each year. We normally open up the grant application in mid-May, and close it in mid-September, allowing a good span of time for people to, submit their applications and do their research. Once the applications are all received and the grant application deadline has come, staff does review each application and evaluate each application. There is a staff team made up of individuals from the Planning, Public Works, and Community Resources Department. We actually go out to each site and look at the site itself and then review the applications. We then rank each project, and each project is competitively ranked against each other project every year, and they are scored on a weighted criteria. Those projects are then ranked, and then we present them to City Council. The 5 criteria that city staff looks at while ranking each project is the benefit of the project versus the cost, if the project increases the health and safety, if the project complies with both the Comprehensive Master Plan, Community Resources Master Plan, and any other adopted plan that we may have in place, the neighborhood support for each application, and then whether or not the project does increase city maintenance requirements. We have really completed a lot of past projects this last year since I came to you, which is pretty exciting. The playground at Green Gables Park has been completed. The sculpture has been designed and installed in the roundabout at 14th and Lamar. We are working on obtaining an easement from the State Land Board in order to complete the connection between Sutherland Park and Main Lake. We anticipate that agreement will be signed, or the easement will be signed pretty soon, and we can go to final design in April and then construction hopefully late 2016. The shelter and picnic tables have been installed in Mount Air Park from 2014. We've also completed the improvements to Morris Park restrooms, which included ADA compliance and obviously some doors and a little better improvements to the restrooms there. We've just completed the sidewalk missing link adjacent to West Gel. The sidewalk ended, as you can see right here, so we continued it all the way down to where the sidewalk enters into the Bear Creek Park, which is a really nice connection there. The interpretive signage, which are 6 panels, have been placed at the Lakewood Wadsworth Station. They're interpretive panels that tell the interesting story of West Colfax and the beginning of Lakewood. For 2015, this past year, all projects are either complete or almost complete. The improvements at Sanderson Gulch, which included thinning and removing a lot of vegetation and cleaning up the gulch area, has been completed. About 8 fruit trees have been planted adjacent to Independence between Colfax and 14th Avenue. We are anticipating the installation of what we're calling the Fireman's Bench at the fire station at 14th and Lamar any day now, hopefully within the next few weeks, and will be followed by a dedication. The sidewalk foundation has already been poured, and we're ready to get that at any time. The landscape improvements at the entrance of Sanderson Creek have been completed. That included soil amendments, rock gulch, the planting of the plants, as well as improved irrigation. The landscape improvements at the entry of Holbrook Park at 7th Avenue are complete. The lighting and landscape improvements at the median at Sheridan and West Iliff are underway. Trenching has begun, and we anticipate that should be completed by the end of spring, early summer. And our little free library has been located at the entrance to Carmody Park. And the horseshoe shoe pits have been placed at Ritchie Park. And our final one from 2015 is the completion of the fitness path and shade shelter at Green Mountain Elementary. And we anticipate the greenhouse going in hopefully late this spring or maybe even early fall. In 2016, we received 14 applications for a total of estimated costs of about $268,000. Staff is recommending 10 projects with an estimated construction cost of $159,000 this year. And the map before you shows the distribution. The little yellow dots on there show you where the applications came from throughout the city. And I think it shows that there's a fairly good distribution throughout of where our applications came in from. So this year, the 10 projects which staff is recommending for approval include artwork at the Iber Elementary Community Garden, bike racks at the Lamar Station, Mount Air Farm, Mount Air Park, and Newland Square Park. These actually came in as 4 separate applications, but for ease, I just lumped them together. We're also recommending the reconstruction of the steps at Hutchin Park off of Morrison Road, and then also a sidewalk connection up to provide better ADA as well as bike access off of Morrison Road into the park. We are recommending another little free library, this one in Belmar Park. We're also recommending the community garden at Green Gables Elementary School. We're recommending improvements at Hilltop Park, which will include a new playground and hopefully some new landscaping. And the final one for this year is to replace the picnic shelter at Glennon Heights Park. So in summary, we were recommending 10 projects for funding this year in a total amount of $159,000. And tonight what I'm asking of council is to direct staff to forward a resolution for the adoption of our recommended projects for the 2016 Neighborhood Participation Program at your regular meeting on April 11th. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Thank you, Holly, for the presentation. I think every year this is kind of a fun one to be a part of and see what's going on and see, what's important to the neighbors and the neighborhoods. So it looks like there are a couple questions. I'll go from left to right, starting with Councilmember Franks.
Thank you. Just a few questions. On the significant budget increase, what would you qualify that as? Is there a dollar range, or is it based on the project? But what would qualify as being a significant increase to the city's maintenance costs?
Well, without a doubt, I would think that, anything that we do on some level, unless it's going to be maintained by, the neighborhood, it will increase the budget sometime. I would say it may be some landscaping improvements. For example, if we are asked to put in a large xeric garden somewhere, a large garden in a park, that would really increase our community resources budgets for improvements. Ross, do you have any other suggestions or ideas that might come for parks?
There's no set dollar figure. It's looking at the relative matter of how much it raises.
Mm-hmm.
Come on down. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Ross, give us an introduction, would you? Let us know who you are.
Okay. I'm Ross Williams, park planner or facilities planner for the city, assisting Holly from the Community Resources Department looking at the projects through, I think, since beginning.
Thank you.
Okay. No dollars.
Okay.
So no dollars.
No, it's not a dollar amount. It's just a relative, increase.
Again, when you say the word significant,
Yeah.
it's like, it's significant.
Everything
different to everybody.
Sure,
so,
sure.
Also, just one question. You mentioned fruit trees. What type of fruit trees and who's going to benefit? Is that something where you guys have already arranged who's going to maybe make sure that doesn't just fall on the ground?
Yes. The adjacent homeowners association will be maintaining watering those trees for us.
Wonderful. And the last question I had is on the community garden. Is that limited to just the people in the walking vicinity, or is it anyone in Lakewood that can join that community garden?
The requirement that we have when we place a program on a school project or a school ground is that the school writes a letter in support and says that it will be open to the community at large. So it will be up to the school to identify who can use the garden. But we anticipate normally it's more within the walking community.
Great. I'm a gardener at Trail Community Garden, and for a
Oh,
long time we
right.
had a big long list, and now that's reduced, but people still do ask where else they can go. So
Okay.
great, thank you.
Sure.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
I think we should feel very special because Dr. Seuss wrote a book regarding your sidewalk there on Yale where the sidewalk ends. Hey, that's
He's
supposed
going to have
be
to write a new
funny.
book, I guess, right? Thank you.
That was an easy question, too, Councilor Harrison.
Well, speaking of that Yale sidewalk, you may have made my life so much easier at Ward 5 meetings. We had one of the homeowners association every single month. They've asked the status of that sidewalk, and he is a happy camper now. So
Yes.
thank you, thank you, thank
Very
you.
welcome. Thank you.
Councilor Wickman.
I wanted to ask about one of the projects that was not accepted, and that's the community gardens there at Foothills Park. Obviously, they'd like some indication of how they can do better or something like that. So do you have some sense as to why they're not making the cut and how they can make the cut next time?
Correct. My recommendation would be that they really reach out to Denver Urban Gardens and work with them to help come up with a plan, a site plan, just like I showed you for Southern Gables, where they had an actual master plan that was submitted by Denver Urban Gardens, with a good cost breakdown of how much it would cost to put the garden in. So when I write my letter back to her, I will make sure that I'm explaining that to her and ask for her to reach out to them.
Yes. Councilor Vincent.
Holly, I may have that same question about the Xeriscape project at Mulholm. I'd just like to be able to go back to the Two Creeks organization and answer that
Sure.
somehow.
Yes, I think one of the concerns, not that it wasn't a great project, but I think one of the reasons why it may not have ranked as high was really more of the question about the increase in maintenance.
Okay.
And also taking away, we wanted to get more input on what would be the benefit other than the watering, of course, but losing all that turf, is that playground really used by people, and do they need that turf? So those were two of our concerns, but mainly it was the increased budget for the maintenance of it.
Okay. And thank you for the bike ride.
You're welcome.
All right, and I would just emphasize that if your neighborhood did participate this year, you weren't able to be selected, please continue to work with staff. This is really something that we really want to make sure that it does get spread out into the community. So, Holly, thank you very much. Is there consensus to move this forward? Yes, looks like there is consensus.
Right.
So
All right.
we
Well,
will
thank you very much.
see you coming up, and thank you to our folks from Glennon Heights who came out tonight, and I'm sure we'll see you back at public comment. All right, thank you. All right, next up on the agenda is a new intergovernmental agreement with the town of Morrison. And Planning Director Travis Parker is here to give us a presentation. And before we start, I would just make a couple quick comments. This is something that we've had in the works since the early 90s. And I had the opportunity to be a part of the Rooney Valley Joint Project Review Committee. And for some reason, I did save my binder. I guess I could give it to Councilor Harrison in case she needs it. But what we're doing is we're looking at an existing IGA that's already in place and discussing some changes that might enhance it a little bit more, make it more relevant to 2016. And this is also of interest, is this will go through Morrison as well. The town of Morrison will be participating in this same effort. And kind of the background or the backbone of what brought this to us states in the 1990s when the communities were talking. The three goals were to eliminate destructive competition, promote joint revenue sharing, and create coordinated developments and coordinated guidance in a very important piece of land that borders both of our communities. So with that, Mr. Parker,
Thank
good
you,
evening.
Mayor, City Council. I'm Travis Parker, Planning Director with the city, and as you've heard, I'm here to talk with you tonight about proposed changes to the intergovernmental agreement between Morrison and Lakewood. And I'll start with some background of the property. As Mayor Paul said, joint planning between Morrison and Lakewood really started in the 1990s when there was an increased development interest in the Rooney Valley, and there was noticed that there might be a future commercial development in the valley. And after a couple of successive annexations between the town and the city and the valley, the leaders of the town and the city decided to get together and coordinate their efforts, with the idea being to avoid a couple negative outcomes. First, without coordinated planning, we would have ended up with a boundary line somewhere in the valley where one half was planned by Lakewood, one half was planned by Morrison. They might look differently, they might act differently, and they wouldn't have been coordinated between them. And perhaps more importantly, without an agreement on revenue sharing, there might have been increased competition for annexation of new commercial projects with an eye towards sales tax. So this agreement allowed the two communities to both jointly plan the valley and avoid competition over sales tax, future sales taxes in the valley. So the IGA that was written in the late 90s and approved in 2000 really focused on three primary areas, as you saw in the memo, and I'll talk briefly about each. The first was joint planning, and the IGA created a body called the Joint Project Review Committee, as our mayor has sat on that committee in the past. And that committee did a couple of things. First, it was responsible for long-range planning in the valley. So that JPRC both helped write and approve the Rooney Valley Master Plan, as well as the Rooney Valley Design Guidelines. So we have coordinated planning effort in both jurisdictions throughout the Rooney Valley. Also, the JPRC was put in charge of review of site plans and subdivisions in the valley. And one of their primary responsibilities was to review these site plans in either jurisdiction, and I'll talk more about that coming up in the changes. The second major area in the IGA was municipal services. At the time, Morrison wasn't in a position to exponentially increase their provision of municipal services if they saw big project growth in the valley. So one of the agreements that was reached in the IGA was that Lakewood would provide a significant number of those services throughout the valley, in both Lakewood and Morrison, including police service, snow plowing, street maintenance, and the like. And so the IGA laid out the provision of those services by Lakewood, as well as a division of other services, including planning, economic development, et cetera, were identified as either shared services or provided by the host jurisdiction. Finally, then, the IGA got into the revenue sharing. And the idea in the revenue sharing was very simple in concept, and I'll talk more about the implications of that, but the concept of the original IGA was take all of the revenue attributable to properties in the valley and put it in a joint account. And then each jurisdiction will take out that portion that they've used in expenses. So Lakewood would take out the price of us doing the snow plowing and the police service and the street maintenance from that pot, and Morrison would take out any of their expenses, and then whatever was left would be split evenly. So that's where we've been since 2000, and we've got about 16 years of experience with this current plan. And that experience has led us to understand some of the problems with implementation of the current IGA. And that's why we're here tonight. A couple of years ago, Lakewood staff sat down with Morrison staff on a variety of issues, and we discovered that they had run across and identified a lot of the same problems that we had. And that begun a discussion to update this plan and make it more usable. And I want to talk about some of those problems that both communities had jointly identified, and then the solutions that we're proposing for them. And I'll start in that same order. So first, in terms of planning, the Joint Project Review Committee, as I said, was assigned responsibility for long-range planning and for approval of site plan and subdivision. Well, there's really three parts to the planning process, and the JPRC was sort of left out of the middle part. The first part, of course, is long-range planning, designing the master plan for the direction of the Rooney Valley. JPRC has an important and legitimate role in that, and does under the proposed plan as well. And then the third, the final is after the entitlements, the approval of the subdivisions and the site plans. That middle step is the entitlement process, the rezonings, and other discretionary processes that give landowners in the Rooney Valley the right to develop their land in a certain way. And the JPRC, in the existing agreement, was left out of that middle process. And so one of the discussions that we have had over the past couple of years with Morrison is that joint planning efforts would be more effectual and more useful if they were front-loaded. If Morrison and Lakewood were having discussions at the phase of rezoning and at the phase of pre-entitlement before we decide what can be built where, versus what we do now, where Lakewood and Morrison jointly discuss the placement of lots in a subdivision or the placements of buildings or houses on a lot when those lots or those subdivisions are already entitled through the zoning code, right? Secondly, there is a process issue with the creation of the JPRC. Instead of creating a JPRC process that was in lieu of an existing process, we added it on top of. So right now, every subdivision or site plan in the city of Lakewood goes through a set process. In the Rooney Valley, we didn't take that away. So any subdivision or site plan in Lakewood still goes through a Lakewood review, but we've added on top a JPRC review of the same things under the same criteria. So we've added a 2-month process to any development project in the Rooney Valley. We basically doubled the review process to get the same result. So the proposal under the IGA intends to fix both of those problems. Basically, we've disbanded the existing, or proposed disbanding the existing JPRC, which is currently made up of 3 members of Morrison, 3 members of Lakewood, and the tradition has been each jurisdiction appoints 1 elected official, 1 planning commissioner, and 1 staff. And we've proposed replacing that JPRC with what we've called a Rooney Valley Zoning Commission that focuses its efforts earlier in the development review process. The proposed Rooney Valley Zoning Commission would be made up of planning commissioners, 3 from Morrison, 3 from Lakewood, and would effectively do the role of the planning commission instead of the town planning commission or the city planning commission within the valley. And thereby, instead of adding on an additional process, we would have a process in lieu of. So things that would normally go to the planning commission in the town would go to the joint planning commission. Things that would normally go to the planning commission in the city would go to the joint planning commission. It's important to note this would not impact the city council's role at all. Right now, a rezoning in the valley goes to the city planning commission for a recommendation. They recommend an action to you, and you have a final say in that. Under the proposed agreement, the joint zoning commission would hear, so both Morrison and Lakewood would hear the application under the auspices of the master plan for the Rooney Valley. They would make a recommendation to you, and you would still have the final say in Lakewood. Morrison Town Board would still have the final say for rezonings in Morrison. So that's the proposal for updating the planning section of the IGA. In terms of municipal services, a lot has changed in Morrison since this agreement was written, and unlike the late 90s, where they were not in a position to provide those municipal services, they now feel that they are in a position to either provide them or negotiate with future developers for them. So the agreement has been written that each municipality will be responsible for municipal services in their own jurisdiction. City will take care of the city roads. Morrison will take care of the Morrison roads and policing and the like. We did leave an option for a municipal services agreement should either party need it. If they need us to step in and help, we can come to an agreement to do that. But the assumption is Lakewood will do services in Lakewood, Morrison will do services in Morrison. And then finally, and I think the changes that are most important in the long run have to do with revenue sharing. So I talked about the simple structure that was designed for revenue sharing, where we throw all the revenues in a pot, take out all the expenses, and split up what's left. As simple as that sound, it proved to be fairly impracticable in practice. And quite frankly, the only reason it still exists is because there haven't been major revenue-producing uses created in the valley yet. The problems include... Let's start on the revenue side of the equation. In terms of basic sales tax, that's a big number. It's easily assignable to a particular property or particular use. That's a number that's easy to calculate and easy to assign within the IGA. Once we get away from sales and use tax, though, it becomes a much trickier equation. An example is property tax. The city gets a bulk payment for property tax. It's not split out to tell us we got $50 from this property and $75 from this property. So in order for us to meet the intent of the existing IGA, Lakewood would have to assign city staff to research each and every property in the Rooney Valley and determine how much of their property tax ended up coming to Lakewood. And the time and money that it would take to do that would likely be pretty close to the amount that we actually got in property taxes from those properties. Similarly, another example is motor vehicle sales tax. In Colorado, as you're all aware, that doesn't come to where the vehicle was purchased. Motor vehicle sales tax goes to where the purchaser lives. And just like property tax, we get a bulk payment that's not split out by address that originated the funds. So we would have to, again, assign city staff to figure out where those funds came from. And again, the investment to do that would not return itself in the amount that we're actually getting. So this problem continues when we start thinking about expenses. The idea is put all money in a joint account, then pull out our expenses. Well, there's no yellow line on the ground to tell our police cars, our snow plows, our street maintenance vehicles when they're crossing into and out of the IGA. And even if there were, we don't have a switch in all those cars to say, all right, now I'm servicing the IGA, now I'm not. Right? So we have no practicable way for us to assign police hours, snowplow hours, street maintenance hours to the IGA versus the rest of the Rooney Valley versus the rest of the city. So in practice, implementing the intent and the words of the existing IGA in terms of revenue sharing are virtually impossible. And so the idea behind the changes is to do three things. First, maintain the intent of the existing IGA. Second, create a system that's simple enough for both Morrison and Lakewood to implement. And thirdly, it needs to be fair to both parties involved, right? So the idea in front of you tonight in the existing IGA is to take sales tax and general use tax as the only revenue that we track for purposes of revenue sharing. That's really what it comes down to, is if a new commercial project comes into the Rooney Valley, be it in Morrison or Lakewood, the two entities are looking to share that revenue. Other revenues are small enough to be inconsequential and difficult enough to track to not be worth our time. So the idea is take these big revenues that are easily trackable. Those will be the revenues that we will agree to split. And when a new commercial project that generates sales tax happens in the valley, it's proposed to be split in this way. We looked at the amount of commercial sales tax that is generally attributable to servicing that particular property and that particular use. And both the town and the city did a lot of work in looking at these numbers. And obviously there's a wide range, right? But the number that seemed to represent a fair value for both the city and the town is 60%. So for every $100 that comes in from a particular commercial use in the valley, Lakewood and Morrison staff have determined that 60% of that is likely going to be spent on services for that use. Police protection, not fire protection, but you understand, police protection, infrastructure, etc. So that first 60 cents on every dollar in sales tax generated in the valley would stay with the host jurisdiction for the point of servicing that use. Now, residential uses require a lot less money to service, but it is something. And so the agreement that Lakewood and Morrison staff reached was that the next 10% would be assigned to pay for residential service in the valley. And that would be then prorated between Morrison and Lakewood. So if Lakewood built 80 homes in the IGA area and Morrison built 20, then for every $10, Lakewood would take 8, Morrison would take 2 of sales tax from that 10%. And then 60% plus 10% leaves us 30% to share equally. And so the last 30% would be split 15% to Lakewood, 15% to Morrison. It sounds complicated, but it's a simple formula that in practice is a heck of a lot easier to implement and understand than the non-formula that we had in place before. And that's the intent of the changes to the revenue sharing section, is to create a formula that we can actually implement and use, and both the city and town can keep track of. There are a lot of smaller textual changes to the code. I wanted to focus my time on the substantive big things, but I'm happy to take the rest of your questions on the code, and we recommend that we move forward also on April 11th for a hearing and vote on this item. Just for your note, the town board is scheduled to hear the IGA on April 4th, I believe. So Morrison will be considering it on the 4th of April.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. I'm sure there will be a few questions, and considering, this is a large document. I was trying to figure out how we'd frame the conversation, so I want to split it into 3 parts, if I could, and we'll just break down kind of how you broke it out, with the questions about the JPRC, surrounding the JPRC as one, municipal services as another, and revenue sharing kind of as the third. So, Councilor Abel, you had your light on first, and we can start with the JPRC questions.
Well, actually, I have dozens. So I'll go through them.
For the JPRC, right?
I'll go through my questions. Some of them don't fit too neatly into baskets.
Okay.
We have we've reduced 50 some odd pages to 20 pages. In doing so, we have deleted all of pages 17 through 39, which include such things as design standards, building codes, outside referrals, and inspections. We have changed the need for a final development plan, which was very thorough and had 5 or 6 pages of instructions on what was to be included in a final development plan. Instead, we have substituted a, quote, approved site plan, which has no standards or regulations noted in the new draft.
Councilor Abel, can we start answering a couple of those as we go, so we don't get
Okay.
too far down the road? Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Abel. So, as I mentioned, what the old IGA did was create a duplicative process. We have in the city of Lakewood a lot of requirements for a site plan, everything that's in here and more. And what we had done with the old IGA was to create another duplicate process for submitting site plans. So they had to come in for the Lakewood site plan process and the JPRC site plan process. And it was a process that, is fine. There's no problem with it, other than it just doubles the work, doubles the time, and doesn't add any benefit. Whereas we can add a lot of benefit by providing a joint review of the rezonings that the JPRC doesn't do now. The JPRC doesn't weigh in on proposals to change the zone in the Rooney Valley, or to change what's allowed to be built in the Rooney Valley. So by providing reviews up front on what can be built, we can actually get a lot more benefit than doubling the review of site plans for uses that are already allowed.
Which site plans are applicable to Lakewood properties under the new draft?
I'm sorry?
Is it our site plan process or the JPRC site plan process that's applicable to Lakewood sites or parcels under the new draft?
Lakewoods.
Thank you.
And then
But it says approved site plans. So is that a final site plan, preliminary site plan, all of the above?
We generally do one phase of site plan in site plan. So we generally just have one phase.
And you wanted to answer which next?
Well, the second one was the final development plan.
Okay. Pages 17 through 39 in the old Rooney Valley plan covered such things as design standards, building codes, outside referrals, and inspections. Where are those to be found in the new draft?
They are, again, duplicative.
Thank you.
We have all those rules in our code.
So as a follow-up to this process, if I was a developer coming into the valley, right now I would still have to go through, I would go through the same process twice as what you're saying, but by removing the JPRC, a project would still go through the same things that were in page 17 through 39, just not twice. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly.
We've removed the vested rights provisions.
We have vested rights provisions in our zoning code.
We've removed the comprehensive development plan process and substituted it with a land use development and review process.
Can you
You explain the difference.
Can you point me to that?
Page 10 of the old code, Article 2. I can find it in the new plan. If future reference, it would be a much easier task for us to compare different plans if we use strike-through versions or red line versions, as most land use
We tried that.
departments do.
We wrote an entirely new code, so it was an entire strike-through and entire...
I know.
You're right.
I know.
I know.
Here's your strike-through version. I would rather you do it than me.
Okay.
Let's see, where am I? Oh, in one section of the new code, instead of inviting people who would like to come annex their properties into Lakewood, we suggest they annex their properties into Morrison.
We've diluted that significantly. The existing IGA requires that for every property in the IGA area. If you'll look at... Let's see if I can find the page.
The comparable page in the old
page
process
20.
is page 14.
Look at page 20, section 206. The town and the city will encourage owners of Bandimere, Old West Stables, Peterson, Alameda State 460 to annex in the town. Further, the city agrees not to annex any of said properties without the approval of the town as expressed by resolution of the town board. We've significantly diluted that in the new plan. So whereas every property in the old IGA was required a right of first refusal to Morrison, now we've limited that to properties that just abut Morrison, and properties that don't abut Morrison we've taken off that list.
I didn't see that qualification in the new draft. We have, in the old plan, there was a pre-application review and a neighborhood referral process.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those are dropped out of the new code, out of the new agreement.
Again, duplicative. For a subdivision, we go to our planning commission, and they have a neighborhood referral process, and they have a public hearing.
The revision of the revenue sharing agreement, you say was simplified, or was, you say the old agreement had a more difficult, or had a more simple process, but it was 15 pages long. It's replaced by one that's what, 2.5? We've added additional services, municipal services, including detention and retention pond language, stormwater drainage facilities, culverts that were not mentioned in the original plan. Is that where our stormwater fees are, or we're going to be assuming more stormwater duties in the valley?
No, same duties that we always would have assumed. The point of this IGA is just to say Lakewood will do what Lakewood does in Lakewood, Morrison will do what Morrison does in Morrison.
Section 19 adds for the first time Public-related improvements shall mean those improvements, yada, yada, including culverts, storm drainage facilities, including necessary retention and detention structures and channels. That language was not in the old.
I'm sorry, what page?
Page 5 of the draft, paragraph 19.
The definitions. Public-related improvements is defined to include, and the idea is there's a section where that talks about either the town or the city can enter into an agreement with a developer to have the developer pay for public-related improvements.
And so that gives the definition then of
what those are.
We add tie vote language to the new draft on page 9. And that's also where the new language on encouraging people who wish to annex to go to Morrison instead.
Again, not new language. It's the same language, but actually diluted significantly.
So just two clarifiers on that, if I may. So the tied vote, I mean, the JPRC right now already includes, it's not an odd number already, right? It's an even number already.
The intention from the beginning has been equal representation between Morrison and Lakewood, which makes an odd number impossible. So, yeah, the number from the JPRC would be the same as the number on the Rooney Valley Zoning Commission.
And what was the second one that you asked after the even voting provision? There was one that came after that.
Oh, I just mentioned that's where the new provision for to urge people to annex into Morrison comes from.
But again, that's not actually accurate, is what I'm hearing. Is that correct? Can we get another clarification on that, please?
So the existing IGA allows right of first refusal for any annexation in the IGA to Morrison.
Anyone.
It lists it lists the properties and it lists them all. The new IGA only lists 2 properties that they have right of first refusal to and takes 2 of those off the list.
So Vandermeer and Peterson are the 2 under the proposed?
Yes, because they're abutting Morrison. Yeah.
It also says the town and city will encourage owners of property that is in unincorporated Jefferson County to annex such property to the town.
That's what the
Morrison.
That's what the existing one says.
Thank you. That's the new one, and that's not what the existing one said. And then finally, we want to create a zoning commission. Article 9 of our planning and zone, Article 9 of our city charter addresses planning and zoning. In paragraph B, it says the city council may also establish a zoning commission by ordinance. This will be a resolution. We're going to do a resolution and ordinance.
I'll have to look at the charter language and see whether that would be applicable to this limited regional area. If it is, we may want to do an ordinance to establish the zoning commission.
It is very broad. The council may also establish a zoning commission by ordinance.
We could also rename
it. Doesn't say R1 by resolution if it's in the Rooney Valley.
We could also rename it the Rooney Valley Planning Commission. That's sort of the intent, is that it's a planning commission. I don't know how we ended up on the name zoning commission, but we can certainly call it that.
Playing tricks with words is not what we need to do. We need to observe our our charter, and I would suggest that if we want to, no matter what we name it, if we change the name of a zoning commission to make it sound like, if you change the name of a horse to a duck, it's still a horse.
But I think we've got.
I would suggest that we just make a 2-step process and adopt it by ordinance, as the charter calls for. Thank you.
Or essentially like an ad hoc committee or another committee is done by ordinance, so the IGA is established via a resolution, and you can do the committee via an ordinance.
Well, I think the key is to look at what the function of the commission really is. Is it a planning commission as defined in state law, or is it a zoning commission? If it's a misnomer to call it a zoning commission and it functions like a planning commission, then that's what it is.
Fair.
And we really need to make sure that we know what it is and have the appropriate procedure to adopt it.
I would also like to note that in the old ordinance, City Council was responsible for appointing 3 members of the commission. It doesn't say 1 council person appointed by council and 2 others from staff. We could name 3 council people. We could do 3 staff members. We can do a mix or match. But it is all 3 by City Council. And so far, the way I understand our process, the only ones we authorize being on this commission is the council member appointed by the mayor.
Okay. And the change in the new draft would put that at the discretion of the city manager of both Morrison and...
No, in Morrison it would be up to the town council,
manager.
and in Lakewood it would be up to the city manager. And we have already been, I think from our zoning ordinance, we should have learned the lesson by now that council shouldn't abdicate its duties to the administration.
Let's keep going with questions. Councilor Franks, please.
I think that might be the same line of questioning that I've got. I'm in the section Article 1, paragraph 34. It talks about the Rooney Valley Master Plan shall mean the master plan as adopted by the town and then the city later. And then it goes on to talk about the differences in version and who gets to kind of review those. And so I wanted to understand more, and apologize, didn't have a chance to read all this as thoroughly as I would have liked, but the Joint Project Review Committee, that's the 3 and 3, is that right? That's the 3 from Lakewood and the 3 from Morrison.
Under the existing IGA.
Okay.
Yes, and the proposal is to create a zoning commission and or planning commission that is made of 3 planning commission members from each city.
Okay. And then it goes on to say that they'll be reconciled by that committee. Does that mean that no changes to that agreement would ever come before council, meaning that that planning commission now would be able to handle that? I'm just concerned when I read that it's talking about future amendments may be approved by the Joint Project Review Committee following notice to the town board and city council, but just says following notice. Does that? I just want to understand what that means to us.
Right, you're reading the old IGA. You're reading the existing one, not the proposed one.
Well, that would be an issue. That would certainly be a problem. I thought I was reading the one that was in the plan, but let me just, so I will kind of table mine and go reconcile that and pass that.
Well, and to that point, though, is there a quick answer to what? Well, can you explain the difference now from that question that she asked?
So,
how does that change
let me read.
from the old to the new? That might help.
So the JPRC, as it exists now, has the ability to write and recommend approval of the Rooney Valley land use plan. The new Rooney Valley Zoning Commission will have that same power. Ultimately, the City Council needs to adopt it. But the planning for the Rooney Valley will be done by the Rooney Valley Zoning Commission. So they will have to adopt amendments and send them to council for approval of the plan, not of the IGA, but of the land use plan.
No, and that helps. And this is where that redlining comes into effect. It's very difficult to keep coming back and trying to reconcile the pieces. And so I did see that my note actually pointed to the other one. But that's where we just really need a redline. It's too hard for all of us because we separately compare these. Yeah. And so the amount of labor that goes in, I would rather see it come to me redlined than us keep trying to reconcile very large documents together. Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Are you done, Councilor Franks? Okay. Councilor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, Travis, I appreciate your presentation, and it sounds like there's a lot of good things that can come out of this. There are some things, though, that I'm kind of wondering about. One of them is that in the old document, we had 41 definitions. In this one, we have 30. And the Alameda and C470 definition has been deleted. That's concerning to me because there's actually increased interest right now in development along there, and I'd like to know, how does that affect that?
It doesn't. The only reason that was defined, the place that term existed under the old plan, was the old IGA required that property be annexed into Morrison. And we took that out. So that property is no longer required to be annexed into Morrison. It now can be annexed wherever they choose to apply to annex. And so that the reference to that property doesn't exist in the current IGA, so there wasn't a need to define it. And that's really the reason that we've gone from 40-some to 30-some. We've got a shorter document with fewer terms that need to be defined.
Correct. We actually went from, if my math is correct, 34 pages to 16 pages. That's quite a bit of change. Also, in the new document, the city manager appoints 3 people, and I think it's from the Planning Commission. Is that right? There is no longer anybody from City Council on this.
No, and I think that's an important distinction if you consider that this Rooney Valley Zoning Commission will be considering rezonings. Quasi-judicial, we can't have city council members pre-considering rezoning. So the idea is that this acts as a planning commission, and probably, to Mr. Abel's point, should have been called a planning commission because that's the body that it's replacing. So planning commission members will serve on this joint planning commission.
Right. Well, it kind of leads to another concern of mine regarding special use permits by the Planning Commission, that personally I think under certain circumstances they should be bounced up to City Council like the Men's Correctional. Mm-hmm. We are responsible to the people, not the Planning Commission. So I think that could be argued both ways, frankly, on this.
And to clarify on that one note, right or wrong, I do believe the Valley excludes any type of correctional institution. So
there's certainly no zoning that would allow it in the Valley now.
There's what?
There's no zoning that would allow
right.
a correctional facility in the Valley
so
now.
That type of special use permit wouldn't come before this body because it's not.
Correct. You couldn't apply for a special use permit in the Valley right now for a correctional facility.
Also, I noticed that with the new appointees, they can be removed without reason or cause. Talk to me about that, please.
I'm not familiar with that language.
Appointees. I don't have the page in front of me. I just know that I saw it.
That sounds like legal language that I may defer to Tim.
Tim, did you write the contract?
No, I don't think we wrote it. I think we reviewed it, but I'm looking for the section on the zoning commission. Yeah,
it's
page 8, I think. Right, an appointed member of the commission may be removed or replaced by the appointing municipality at any time without reason or cause. I think that's consistent with the rules regarding planning commissions. I think
and it's consistent with the language from the existing.
Yeah,
that language is pulled from the
right.
existing IGA.
Right.
I just found it in the existing.
Right. I think that carried over without change.
I've actually spent hours on this, going back and forth between these two documents. I come from a legislative background in which when we are given a proposed bill, Nanette understands this, there's strike-through language, there's underlining language that tells you exactly what's been deleted, what's been changed, what's been added to. It's much easier than trying to do this.
I'd be happy to provide that before the hearing.
I would like to say I'd like to make a motion that we table this until a date certain so that we on council can get a document that has red lines in it telling us what's been deleted, telling us what's been changed, telling us what's been added to. Our names are on the votes. We need to have accurate information in front of us so that we actually understand what we're voting for. And for me, this is very confusing, and I'd like to see us have that document first before we go forward, and I'd like to make a motion to that.
And just to manage expectations, it doesn't look pretty. I'll send it to you, but it was mostly completely rewritten. So the red line that I created when I first did it was unintelligible. It's all strike through, all new.
That's helpful, though, because we've gone from 34 pages, Travis, to 16.
Fair enough.
And at least
that.
we've got it right in front of us, what's been deleted, what's been changed. Again, before I vote, I want to be able to really understand what I'm voting on. And so my motion stands.
We actually don't take official action at these meetings, so the fact that there's a motion presented in a second, we don't make any kind of votes. But this isn't scheduled to go before this body until April 11th.
And I can provide that as early as this week.
Right. So I think with that said, you know, that would be fair to me to have that done by this week and be plenty of time for council to see the two different things. Councillor Harrison.
Currently, I serve, I think, on the JP. We haven't had meetings in a long time,
No.
so I just wanted to kind of share with council my experience of doing that.
Mine.
Morrison uses some different language in their zoning ordinance than what we do. So part of the first issue at JPRC meetings was to try to coordinate the language and make sure that everyone understood what you were talking about there. One of the things, if I understand the agreement correctly, what we're doing is we're eliminating that language barrier, so to speak, and we're allowing two planning commissions to come together to be able to look at things. City Council's not losing anything because we still will get that presentation made to us. We would still be voting on it just like we do currently, correct? So we're not losing control. In fact, we're gaining control, I believe, because we get to look at it the same way we always have. And we're trusting our three planning commissioners, whomever they might be, to be able to apply the current process to it. It really makes sense not to have the additional step in there, to me. It really does, simply for the fact that when a developer comes, they're trying to get boots on the ground and ready to go into business. When we add another 60 or 90 or 120 days to this process, where two different groups have to look at it, it makes it that much more difficult. If we can combine, work together, make that in one step, that really makes a lot of sense to me. So Travis, I think this really makes sense, especially from my experience with what I've had with JPRC. Thank you.
Councillor Vincent.
And I don't even know how to approach this or if it's a question. I get very nervous when I hear about municipalities, especially police. And a lot of it could be because of where I live. We have fights back and forth between Denver and Lakewood and which side is it on and where does it go. And there's been a disservice to people on those border areas. They get caught in the middle. So I don't know if there's anything that we can do to address those situations. So there's some sort of overlapping. So if Morrison does come and they find out later it should be Lakewood, do they just get them involved at that point or what? Because I would hate to see people be disserviced because of, I understand the intent behind it, but it can be a disservice to people on borders.
Well, and I think what we would have is some sort of mutual aid agreement, correct, to where whoever responded first would.
Well, and if it's helpful, I'm happy to invite the chief to the hearing. I know he's a favor of the change. Right now, his officers are responsible to respond in Morrison. And I think he'd prefer, and I know from discussing with him that he'd prefer just a distinct line that we would respond in Lakewood and Morrison responds in Morrison. So if it would help, I'm happy to have ask the chief to come on April 11th to address that.
That would work for me, Council, but I would like that. Thank you.
Councillor Coop.
Mr. Parker, when we talk about planning commissioners, the three planning commissioners, I've assumed this whole time that they are currently Lakewood planning commissioners.
Correct.
Was there any thought to having three additional separate planning commissioners not affiliated with the Lakewood Commission?
No, the idea is joint cooperation between Lakewood and Morrison. So the idea is to have three of our planning commissioners and three of their planning commissioners reviewing rezoning proposals in the valley. So Yeah, we've never given any thought to having people outside of that circle.
Thank you.
Councilor Franks.
This is just a follow-up now that I've gotten a little more organized here in the right section. So my first question is then, it sounds like you guys are going to be looking at the words planning commission versus zoning commission. Is that right? That you'll be looking to see which one it really should fall in so we know was resolution versus ordinance. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm positive that this doesn't meet the definition of what the charter defines as a zoning commission, so we should be looking at that language, absolutely.
All right, so that was one. Two, as a project manager, I'm all for simplification, so I do appreciate that we're looking to streamline processes and not do duplication of effort. But one thing that at least concerns me, and I don't have a lot of experience with these IGAs, it's anytime we do appointments where we're appointing people. Like I'm on the screening committee, and so we get to select, and so I'm wondering what the opportunity is for maybe rather than it being city manager appointed, but it be some kind of a selection that still keeps us in that process rather than, again, anytime it's appointments, we're responsible to the voters. I like to stay as engaged in putting people forth in positions that the council agrees with. So I just wanted to put that out there to see if any of my fellow councilors might be of the same thinking.
And if I may follow up, I mean, that's a very good point, and I think we also need to remember those folks are actually picked by us. It's just the assemblage is drawn from that planning commission. So the planning body's already picked and by this council or by this body and ratified by this body. It's just then chosen from a group of folks that have been picked. But it sounds like as we move forward, that might be something that can be looked at.
We can look at anything.
Okay. Councilor Franks, is that? Okay. Councilor Johnson and Councilor Harrison.
Actually, I'm always appreciative to hear Councilor Harrison's perspective because I know you're on planning. And it's come up regarding the time frame, that this makes things more condensed and quicker to keep going. I'm not so sure I buy into having a shorter time frame. Sometimes I think, particularly with this particular real estate, I'm okay with it taking a little bit longer. And as I say, there is increased interest in this regarding doing some kind of automobile-type dealerships up and down that strip. So I think time does help. Plus, I'd like to see some type of formal language that talks about public input a little stronger there. The people that live around that need to have some buy-in to what's going on. And it looks like we've already got a time that we're going to be voting on this. Is it April 11th? Is that what you said? I personally am not comfortable in setting a time for that until we have that side-by-side document comparison with the red line. And we really understand what's been deleted, what's been added, what's been changed.
Councilor Harrison.
I just wanted to add, with the JPRC, I think the time that I've been on that commission, we've only had 3 meetings. So that kind of gives you a time frame of how heavy duty. Now, I realize it's probably going to get busier, but that kind of gives you, I think, an idea of the work.
In 16 years, there have only been 3 projects that have gone all the way through the JPRC, a church and 2 subdivisions. And that's more a function of just what's been happening in the valley in the last 16 years.
Councilor Wickman.
Sounds to me like most of the questions have been addressed, but Councilor Franks brought one up that I'm not clear on, and I'd like to be, and that's choosing the 3 members. Our 3 members are going to be from our 7-member planning commission, so we know what our pool is. Now, it's not clear to me is who is going to select those 3. And I think what I heard Councilor Franks say, which I agree strongly, is I think the council should be fully responsible for picking those 3 as opposed to the city manager.
Okay. Councilor Abel.
Well, I'm going to go out there The Rooney Valley Agreement had its genesis when Greg Stevenson was planning to build Mills Mall in the Rooney Valley on the Morrison side. And Lakewood decided we wanted part of that tax revenue. So we had the Rooney Valley plan put together. I am not sure we have any business having a Rooney Valley plan. Lakewood can take care of its own. Morrison can take care of its own. Jeffco, bless its heart, can't take care of itself. But I understand there are some moves being made on the Jefferson County Planning Department that would vest more authority in the planning director and some waiver powers over development. And we haven't mentioned the Jefferson Economic Development Commission, which has some sway out there in the valley and certainly has lobbying efforts going on out there. I'm just not sure that we need this agreement, but in any case, I'm hoping that we don't reach consensus to send this alone, that we indeed reach consensus that we just want to leave it set at best.
Leave it sit with the existing agreement?
I'm sorry?
Leave the existing agreement in place?
If we must.
Okay, so there's a couple things here, I guess that I've observed, and being a board member of Jeffco EDC for some time, we have overlapping organizations, whether it's the West Chamber, the Jefferson County Economic Development Corporation, or the Rooney Valley. There used to be a chamber specific to the Rooney Valley that hasn't been functional for some time. But Jeffco EDC, to the lobbying extent, what they're focused on is primary jobs, and they picked out a couple areas. The Rooney Valley is definitely one of the last developable pieces of land in Jefferson County, along with a few others. I think they picked out 5. So that's kind of the correlation there. There's also tremendous water issues out in the valley that have really stopped a lot of development from going further. And to Councilor Abel's comment about Greg Stevenson, there's also the town of Morrison that didn't want to see a lot of residential come into their boundaries because they have about 300 and some voters, and they didn't want to tip that upside down. So there's a lot of things at play, and I guess what I'm hearing from our staff, and there needs to be a nice understanding here. We're here to trust but verify, and these folks are trying to make the best things, make things that may have been a good idea 16 years ago, make it more relevant and bring it back up to speed to where it is today. And the fact that you have 2 different municipalities, and this is rare, think about this, 2 different, look at all the other sides that we have around our community, whether it's Jefferson County, whether it's Wheat Ridge, Denver. This provides revenue sharing. It provides a vision for an area that we've all set up here that is an important vision for our community. It's some of the last greenfield space. So this allows kind of a double check process in that by saying not only does it have, Lakewood could just go through and do whatever they want, but the little town of Morrison has a say. But it also gives that little town of Morrison a say as well. And the original intent of this, which is what I started out by saying, is to eliminate destructive competition, joint revenue sharing, create coordinated developments, and coordinated guidance. So I appreciate what you've brought forward. I'm actually very impressed, Travis, with your knowledge of both of these documents because, you weren't here from the inception of these. So thank you for bringing this. And I would definitely urge consensus. But I think, too, there's a few things that if we go forward with this, one is the naming of it, so defining really what that looks like. So bring that back to us with, when we look at the next one, a red line within the next few days. Make sure that we have a police presence at our next presentation so the chief can talk about that. And then another issue that was brought up by a couple council members was dealing with, some potential amendments around picking the folks to be on that group. So with those said, I would hope that there's consensus to move this forward.
No, negative.
Okay, well, there's consensus to move forward. Councilor Wickman. We don't take votes. There's a consensus to move forward.
Well, can I just speak to the question? Can I just speak to the question?
1 second, please, and I will call on you. Okay? There's consensus. There's a first and second reading part to this process. Because there's a resolution, so there'll be a public hearing. We can extend the date certain, but we have a town of Morrison that is looking at going forward as well. So I don't understand why there's a concern to move forward and look at the things that were asked of tonight. So I will ask if there's consensus.
Can I speak?
Sure.
So the consensus included, though, possibly looking at amending it to...
Absolutely. All those things. The naming, the red line, the chief, the assemblage of how the people get put on that, whether it's council, all those things put in for us and the red line within the week. So is there consensus?
Can I speak to the question?
Yes.
Okay. There are a lot of questions that have been raised, and I've heard a lot of answers. It's looking pretty good. However, I'm concerned about the process. And this is going to be, I've said this across the board. I'm tired of coming to these meetings to get a presentation. Then all of a sudden, in the next hour, I've got to be making this decision. I would like to be able to go back and talk to my people and get some input as to where they would like to go. So it's not that I'm opposed to where we're going tonight, but I don't want to be rushing through these things all the time. I think there was some talk about, let's put it off for a week or two, give me a chance to go back to talk to my constituents, and then at that point I'd be willing to make whatever vote. But I don't like being pushed into it tonight.
Councilor Abel. Okay. So, can we look at calendaring? We have the 11th is where it was. What's the next regular meeting after the 11th? The 18th, the 24th, 25th? What's on the schedule for that? Is there a regular meeting that night?
Sustainability events that night. I think we have a rezoning maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, and that's fine. There is no there in this, right? I mean, so the more time, that's fine. As long as there's not an issue with the town of Morrison, that's fine.
Right. The only consideration is I think they'll be considering it on the 4th.
Right.
So if we make changes, they'll have to consider it again, which is fine.
Okay. So the consensus to move forward would be the things that I mentioned, as well as looking to move it towards April, 25th? And if it's too crowded on the 25th, then the second Monday in May. Mm-hmm. So do I have consensus on that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So there's consensus for that. Again, Travis, thank you for your presentation. And council, appreciate the discussion. All right. Item 5 is reports. I do not have a report. Councilor Johnson.
No report.
Councilor Coop.
I do have a report, Mayor. I'd like to take this time to update council on a concern that was brought up at a meeting a couple meetings ago by citizen James Mace in the dark intersection at Colfax and Kendall. The city has gone forward and tried to fix that problem. XL has had to turn to, there was no power where a new street light is going to be put in at that intersection, an overhead street light, not a traffic light. And so the electric company that has been contracted to work on that is running running behind schedule by 2 or 3 months. So that is going to be isn't going to happen immediately, but the street light has been ordered. It is going forward, and I want to thank staff for finding the solution and reaching out to XL and making this happen for James and everybody that uses that intersection right there. It is. I sat there one night in the evening after it got dark and watched the amount of people going through that area, and it's going to be a good addition to safety.
Thank you. Councilor? No report. Oh, no report. Councilor Harrison?
No report.
Councilor Roybal, you do have a report. This is
have
exciting.
A report, thank you.
Absolutely.
I just want to let everybody know it's very exciting. Today, we have moved the World War II Veterans Memorial behind the old Lakewood High School to the new Lakewood High School as of 2:30 this afternoon. And I want to go ahead and extend my thank yous to Austin Reynolds from Troop 130, and he took the lead on this. So I also want to let people know that we're going to have a rededication for Memorial Day on May 30th to rededicate this World War II Veterans Memorial. So, thank you.
And Councilor Roybal didn't mention, because it was himself, but he's really worked hard on this, so thank you for your hard work, and been on this for a couple years, so it'll be a good celebration. Councilor Vincent? Councilor Wickman?
Yeah, I'd like to take the opportunity to reiterate a common position I want to take on everything we're doing here. You know, open and transparency is the important thing. And what I'm concerned is so many times we have things like tonight's where it's a presentation at study session, and the citizens don't have any idea as to whether or not there's going to be some sort of decision made. Now, of course, there's only 3 days when you get the word on Friday. But, you know, I don't have opportunity to get input from folks. The reason I bring it up is I know we got another presentation coming up here in the future on art space. And I'm sitting there, it's a presentation, I'm just going to sit here and listen. But if all of a sudden at the end of the presentation I have to make some sort of recommendation, you know, I would like to know what I'm going to be voting on. And more importantly, you know, my constituents would like to know how they would like to advise me. So again, I'd like to emphasize over and over again that we need to be putting out the word in advance and stop a lot of this surprise stuff. So that's my comment.
Right. Michelle, anything? Tim? Nanette? All right. Well, thank you all for coming out and tuning in. And Miss Hodson is not with us tonight. She's not feeling well, so we hope she feels better as well. Have a good night. Thank you.
Yes, it's all over town. How you put me